Welcome back to the deep dive. We have a powerful stack of sources in front of us today, and the collective narrative they weave is, well, it's startling. We're looking at the enormous strain currently being placed on global and local systems.
Yeah, everything from cyber defenses, institutional capacity for care.
Right, up to massive climate policy gridlock, and just the exhausting reality of long-term conflict.
Exactly. So our mission today really is to synthesize these updates, which might seem pretty disparate at first glance. I mean, you might think a story about a family-run luggage business getting hacked doesn't connect to a UN climate summit in the Amazon.
Right. Seems worlds apart.
But they share this profound common thread: vulnerability. We need to look closely at resilience and also the devastating, sometimes deadly distance between high-level policy and the actual human impact on the ground.
What leaps out immediately, for me anyway, is that enduring human cost, when a system fails or a conflict just drags on and on. It's not just the sudden crisis. It's the quiet, grinding adaptation needed just to survive day to day.
That's a great point.
So let's start there. Let's look at what liberation truly means, 3 years on, in a place like Kherson, Ukraine.
Okay. So when Kherson was liberated back in November 2022, after 9 months of Russian occupation, there was this huge global celebration. You remember that.
Absolutely.
Big moment. But our sources confirm that initial joy, it's long since faded. It's been replaced by what residents now call a wary stillness.
And that stillness is deeply deceptive, isn't it? The threat is absolutely constant.
Relentless Russian strikes pounding the city with regular intensity from just across the Dnipro River.
And the drones. The air constantly patrolled by surveillance and attack drones.
Which leads to these extraordinary adaptation measures. We're seeing this surreal layer of technological defense being layered over daily life.
You mean the mesh?
Exactly. Residents are stringing up repurposed plastic mesh, the kind you'd see on construction sites over streets or buildings.
Just trying to shield civilians from drones targeting anything that moves below.
Yeah. And I found the detail that hospitals are entirely wrapped in this netting. Just incredible.
It completely redefines what infrastructure is supposed to be, right? It's not about utility anymore. It's purely passive defense.
It's the psychological shift, too, that's so insightful here. Turning tools of construction, of growth, into these passive shields. It redefines what normal functioning infrastructure even means in a war zone.
And you read about Ola Komenitska, the florist,
Yeah.
trying to keep her small stand going.
Yeah, her description of the drone sound,
Yeah.
the enemy's eyes, she calls them,
A low, screeching whine.
forcing her to literally press against walls just to walk home safely. Imagine that.
But there is a high-tech counter-defense happening, too. We have the story of Max from the 310th Separate Marine Electronic Warfare Battalion.
Right, working at what's described, almost charmingly, as a gamer-style workstation.
He's definitely not playing games, though.
No, his unit intercepts and neutralizes an incredible volume of these FPV drones.
First-person view drones. Often cheap, but high impact.
Yeah, sometimes stopping 90% of up to 250 drones headed toward Kherson in just half a day.
Wow.
But he admitted, seeing a strike hit a soldier or a civilian, even remotely through his systems, it weighs heavily on his soul. That's the emotional toll right there on the technological front line.
And because the streets are just too dangerous, life literally moves below ground.
Children's clubs gathering in basements, playing chess, playing checkers.
The coach noted that for these kids, everything in their lives is remote. They can't even run outside and play, just stuck.
That intense confinement, that constant low-level threat, it really reveals a systemic vulnerability created by conflict.
Yeah.
And if we follow that theme, that vulnerability, and maybe shift our gaze from the entrenched war in Ukraine to the aftermath of a dictator's fall in Syria, we see vulnerability taking a different but equally devastating form following the collapse of the Assad regime.
Right. The new interim government, they promised stability. They vowed to protect all citizens, not just the majority Sunni population. That was the pledge.
That was the pledge. But the reality, according to our sources, is that sectarian violence, often just acts of personal revenge, is escalating dramatically.
And numbers are pretty stark.
They really are. Between June and October, just in Homs alone, an estimated 40 Alawites were killed in targeted attacks.
And these aren't just military targets we're talking about.
No, not at all. This included a teacher shot dead right in front of her class, a student killed.
And we have to understand the context here, the background. Alawites make up maybe 10% of Syria's population.
Roughly.
But they filled so many powerful roles, military, security, intelligence, under the Assad regime for decades.
Right. So our sources note that regardless of whether an individual Alawite personally supported the regime or not, that association now makes them a target. It's collective blame.
So the very system designed to transition the country towards stability has instead kind of opened the door to immediate, localized, brutal retribution.
A vacuum, really. And this failure of governmental transition, it leads us quite neatly to the failure of institutional control in other areas.
Right.
Specifically, where systems are designed to protect, but they either facilitate crime or just break down internally. Let's look at the mindset behind high-tech crime.
Okay, yeah. We have this story of the jail-hacking kingpin, Pichikov.
Right.
His initial justification for stealing millions. It was completely cynical. He basically argued he didn't have victims.
How did he figure that?
He claimed Western companies and people could afford the loss. And anyway, insurance covered everything. No harm, no foul, essentially.
That kind of detachment, I guess it's essential if you want to scale up cybercrime like he did. But you mentioned a specific anecdote that just completely demolishes that premise.
Now, what happens when that abstract crime hits the ground, hits real people?
Exactly.
We see the case of Lieber's Luggage, a family-run business in New Mexico.
Not some huge bank.
No, a small retailer. They lost $12,000 in one attack.
Which, for a global corporation, yeah, that's a rounding error. Maybe less.
But for Lieber's Luggage, that $12,000 was devastating. It was money for rent, for restocking merchandise, for paying staff.
The essentials.
The owner, Leslie, she talked about the psychological trauma, especially watching her elderly mother, who managed the accounts, blaming herself for this disaster until they figured out it was theft.
Oh, that's awful.
So Pinchikov's claim that insurance covers it is just a self-serving lie. But here's what I find truly unsettling about his story.
What's that?
His only stated regret wasn't really about the victims' except for a quick mention of a ransomware attack on a disabled children's charity, which he seems slightly sorry for.
Okay.
But his main regret, trusting his fellow hackers. That's what led to his capture.
Doesn't that just fundamentally undermine any narrative of remorse? If his primary regret is trusting his co-conspirators.
It shows zero accountability for the actual damage caused, right?
Exactly. His mindset is perfectly reflected in his own grim catchphrases. You can't make friends in cybercrime.
And paranoia is a constant friend of hackers.
Wow.
Paranoia.
Ugh.
It seems like the logical outcome when systems fail, whether that system is trust among criminals or the complex apparatus of mental health care. Which brings us to another critical example of institutional failure. This one at the NELFT Mental Health Unit, following the tragic death of Alice Figueiredo.
Yeah, the failures here were deeply systemic. Our sources indicate that staff at the Northeast London Foundation Trust, NELFT, they felt unsupported.
Right.
And the trust itself acknowledged that workforce pressures have historically impacted the quality of care. That's a direct quote.
Okay, so they admit there were pressures.
Yes,
Yeah.
but the most alarming part is the breakdown of the very tools they used, the ones designed to assess risk.
The traffic light system you mentioned.
That's the one, for patient risk assessment.
Yep.
But the sources say it was frequently inaccurate or just completely outdated.
Could you give us the most concrete example? How catastrophic could that false sense of security be?
Well, we have the specific case of a client flagged green, which means low risk, stable, needing less intense observation.
Okay, green means go, basically.
Yeah.
Less worry.
Right. Yet that very same client was later picked up by the police following really serious allegations of assault and hostage-taking with a bladed weapon.
Oh my God. From greenlit to hostage-taking.
That green light essentially removed the necessary scrutiny, potentially allowing a crisis to escalate when it might have been caught.
And crucially, feedback about these dangerous inaccuracies. Staff were reportedly sending it back up the chain.
Yes, but the report says it wasn't really being acknowledged.
A total failure of internal accountability, then.
Pretty much. Now, legally, the support worker involved was acquitted of gross negligence manslaughter, but he was convicted of failure to take reasonable care, and he's currently appealing that conviction.
But the systemic point remains. The system failed to acknowledge and integrate critical feedback from the front line.
Which means vulnerable people and the wider community remain at risk if those feedback loops aren't fixed.
So if the failure of internal communication plagues our healthcare systems,
Then the failure of international commitment plagues global policy. Let's pivot now to the immense, immediate crises caused by climate change.
Which serve as this harrowing backdrop for all the global negotiations.
Exactly.
We've seen these powerful, almost constant reminders just recently. Typhoon Fung-wong slammed the Philippines.
Killed 2, displaced over 1.4 million people. Just massive disruption.
And at the same time, recovery is still ongoing in Jamaica after Hurricane Melissa, a storm that survivors said just lays bare the island's new climate reality.
Yeah, and this is the world leaders are gathering in. We're talking about COP30 in Belém, Brazil.
The location itself is incredibly symbolic, isn't it? Right next to the Amazon rainforest.
Absolutely vital for global climate regulation, but fighting intense deforestation pressures. They're expecting up to 50,000 participants.
50,000. The logistics alone must be surreal.
Well, yeah. To accommodate that many people in that location, they had to get incredibly creative. We're talking cruise ships brought in for lodging.
Cruise ships, okay.
And in one instance reported, converting local strip clubs into temporary housing.
Seriously. Wow. Okay.
It speaks volumes, doesn't it, about the priority versus the on-the-ground reality.
So Brazil's President Lula calls this the Conference of Truth and Implementation. He's stressing this is the moment for action.
That's the rhetoric. Yet the reality is deeply frustrating for the climate leaders involved.
Why? What's the specific breakdown in implementation? Where's the holdup?
Well, by November, fewer than 70 countries had actually submitted new climate targets. That's well past the September deadline they were aiming for.
Less than 70 out of nearly 200 countries.
Yeah. And more critically, no country is currently doing enough to limit warming to that 1.5 degrees C Paris Agreement goal. The pledges just aren't matching the scientific necessity, not even close.
Yeah. And the key sticking point in the negotiations, as always seems to be the case, it's money, right?
It often comes down to finance, yeah. Poor, more vulnerable countries are, quite rightfully, demanding significantly more financial support from the rich, industrialized world.
Not just for preventing future warming, but for adaptation, coping with the consequences already here.
Exactly. For mitigating the impacts that are hitting them now. Brazil is trying to lead by example, though, with its Tropical Forest Forever Facility Fund.
Okay, what's that?
They're aiming to raise $125 billion. It's a big prestige initiative for them. And importantly, at least 20% of that funding is specifically earmarked for indigenous communities.
Who are often the most effective protectors of the forests on the ground.
Precisely. Rewarding forest protection directly.
But that international commitment overall, it still feels shaky.
It does. You see Germany, a really critical EU leader, actually slowing its ambition by expanding its reliance on fossil gas. That definitely impacts the EU's global leadership role.
Undermines it, really.
And while China is stepping up in certain pioneering roles, analysts point out its primary concern remains protecting its national interests, rather than pushing for some radical collective agreement.
So self-interest, not shared commitment, is still kind of defining the policy landscape.
It seems that way, and that concept of self-interest, or maybe the powerful protecting themselves, brings us right to the battle over national memory and justice, where the past is being actively rewritten.
Ah, yes. This is the deeply controversial decision in Indonesia, declaring the former dictator Suharto a national hero.
Yeah. President Prabowo Subianto's administration offered several justifications for this.
Let's hear them.
Suharto's role in the struggle for independence, his efforts to take control of West Papua, alleviating poverty back in the day, taming inflation, defeating a communist uprising. It's presented as a list of historical achievements.
Okay. But the outrage from rights groups is intense. They're calling this a transparent attempt to just whitewash decades of horrific human rights abuses and corruption during his 32-year authoritarian rule.
And the human cost they cite is just staggering, up to 1 million political opponents killed during his time.
Including between 300,000 and 800,000 alleged communists massacred in 1965-66 alone.
The scale is almost unimaginable, and the pain is still incredibly present for survivors. We have this quote from Bejo Untung.
A survivor who was imprisoned and tortured under the regime.
Yes. He expressed profound shock and anger. He said, "It feels deeply unfair. We are still living with the suffering until today."
Still living with it.
And analysts argue this action by the current government is functionally to de facto pardon state violence.
So the system, in this case the government itself, isn't just failing to provide justice for past wrongs.
It's attempting to elevate the architect of mass abuse to heroic status, fundamentally distorting national memory for political gain.
That makes the next brief update feel almost like a breath of fresh air, strangely. A domestic political system actually attempting to resolve its own severe crisis.
Right, a little bit of functional politics, perhaps?
We're talking about the U.S. Senate taking a step toward ending that record-setting government shutdown that had been running since October 1st.
Yeah, this is a powerful, if temporary, contrast to some of the systemic failures we've just discussed. It shows that even in really entrenched gridlock, the system can sometimes pull itself back from the brink.
So what's in the deal?
It's a stopgap funding bill, funded until January 30th. Crucially, it would restore vital programs like the SNFP food stamp program.
Which supports 42 million people. Huge number.
Massive. And it would rehire hundreds of thousands of federal workers who'd been furloughed.
And the compromise needed to get there to make the system function again.
It involved Republicans agreeing to hold a December vote on extending the Affordable Care Act ACA tax credits. That was a key non-budget related demand from the Democrats they finally conceded on.
So it proves that despite high stress, accountability to the populace to the impact of the shutdown can force compromise when the alternative is just total system failure.
Sometimes, yeah. So if we look back now across a whole range of sources today, from the hackers justifying their actions to the global climate leaders to the revisionists of history in Indonesia,
What's the thread?
we see this pervasive challenge of accountability, don't we?
Right.
The hacker who avoids responsibility for the victims, the healthcare system that fails to acknowledge internal risk signals,
The nations who miss climate targets while clearly prioritizing self-interest.
and the government that tries to actively whitewash mass atrocities instead of reckoning with them.
And the result of that accountability gap, it's felt hardest on the individual level every single time.
Always.
Whether it's that family business losing $12,000 and struggling to make rent, or 1.4 million people displaced by a typhoon in the Philippines.
Or a child playing chess in a Kherson basement because it's too dangerous to go outside.
The systems built for security, for protection, they're consistently strained, subverted, or they just fail entirely. The line between being safe and being completely vulnerable feels terrifyingly thin sometimes.
Which really leaves us with this final thought for you, our listener, to consider. In a world where paranoia is literally described as a constant friend of hackers, and where constant warfare pushes children's lives into basements, how do individuals successfully balance that fundamental need for protection and stability with what seems like a profound and often justified inherent distrust of the very systems that are supposed to provide it?
And maybe the bigger question, when does the failure of a system stop being an exception, stop being a crisis, and just become the new normal?